Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of our notes on the Civil War. This last part will take us through the turning point of the war at the Battle of Gettysburg, and take us all the way through the end of the war and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So by 1863, the Confederacy really started to struggle with this war. They started to fight a little bit more of an offensive war. They just got told pretty much by the British and the French that they weren't going to be helping them. The Union has this blockade going along the coast, and ultimately the South is going to be very ill-prepared at this point, ill-supplied to fight the war. So the Confederates try to do different things. They try to print more money. This leads to inflation, and ultimately the economy in the Confederacy is going to essentially just get very bad at this point. So in July of 1863, Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army tries to move into the North and bring the war up in the northern part, back into the Union. So they're going to fight in a place in Pennsylvania known as Gettysburg, kind of central PA towards the south. And it becomes a very important battle, important enough to be considered the turning point of the war. Robert E. Lee tries to bring his army there. They are unsuccessful. The Union wins. And ultimately, that's the last time the South is going to really attempt to bring the war up to the North. You also have the Battle of Vicksburg down here along the Mississippi River. And ultimately, with the Battle of Vicksburg and the fighting happened along the Mississippi River, now the Union is going to gain control of this whole part of the Mississippi River. So ultimately, this Anaconda Plan, this attempt to surround the South, will become even more successful after this Battle of Vicksburg. You guys did an assignment this week on the Gettysburg Address. This is a picture of Lincoln on the left side, and a very simple photograph of Lincoln making the speech of the Gettysburg Address. So just to give you guys a little bit more help with this, and if you watch this video, it might help you answer the questions that you have to answer. So the Gettysburg Address is a very simple speech, very short, but very profound in the things that Lincoln is going to say in it. So in this first part, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So that last part, all men are created equal, should sound very familiar. Those are the lines from the Declaration of Independence. So ultimately, Lincoln is recognizing these are the principles that our government was founded upon. These are the ideas that the United States stands for as part of this nation. In the second paragraph, ultimately what he's saying there, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this war is ultimately going to be a big test for the United States. These principles laid out in that first part, are they going to last? Are they going to stand? And this war is really going to be an important aspect of that. So he's at this point. They had this pretty profound battle in the North, and ultimately this battle and this war moving forward is of paramount importance for the United States. And he continues on in the speech to dedicate this land not only to these soldiers that have perished there, have died there, but then also people carrying on this battle. And ultimately, what we're going to see is, if the Union wins this war, that's the way in which they're going to be able to preserve these values, preserve this Union, is by the Union winning this war. So pretty important speech that Lincoln makes here, and pretty important for the United States. And, it's one of the most important speeches made in U.S. history. So Grant takes over. The Union Army starts to be a little more aggressive. William T. Sherman takes control of the Southern campaign, and he's going to institute a policy of really destroying everything of value to the South. And along the way, they're going to be emancipating slaves. So I like this slide not only because it's got the cool fire animation, but considering the fact that the South and really the North, everybody is throwing everything they can into this war and has this whole total war. Everything that the Army is going to encounter is something that's helping the South. So as they're marching along the way, railroad tracks, farms, important political buildings, things like that, all of that is contributing to the South's support of this war. So what you'll start to see is setting fields on fire, burning them so that they're unusable. Another thing that I think is interesting and cool, and I'll throw a picture into the folder, is Sherman has these things that they call Sherman neckties. So what they do is as they approach railroad tracks, they'll rip up the track and they'll melt it down and they'll bend it and wrap it around itself, wrap it around trees, and ultimately make the train track completely unusable. The way I like to explain that is you take a paper clip in its original form and then you start bending it and manipulating it. And then eventually what you try to do is put the paperclip back into its original form. And it's, you can get it close, but it's still just not quite right. And that's kind of what's happening to these railroad tracks. So pretty important battles along this route that Sherman's going to take. The Battle of Atlanta, very important for railroads. Again, they're destroying all the railroads along the way. In the midst of all of this, Lincoln has to run for re-election. So Lincoln runs against George McClellan, one of the former generals. A lot of focus on the North's war failures, the fact that this war is still ongoing. Hearing that Atlanta fell during Sherman's march to the sea, that helps Lincoln get reelected. Now, Lincoln's looking forward. He wants this war to end. He knows this war is going to end at some point. And what he is starting to do is campaign really not for being president during the war, but for being president after the war. So what they realize is what's going to happen, and we'll get into this more in future weeks, is they need to reconstruct the country. They need to bring the country back together. So as part of what he says in this speech, and it's a pretty important line, and I have it down here at the bottom, his reconstruction plan for the Union with malice towards none and charity for all. So it's not that the South won't be punished, but ultimately it's about healing. It's about bringing the country back together. And that's going to be Lincoln's goal is, how can we heal the wounds that this war and this institution of slavery has created. So Lincoln is able to win, and I wanted to just show you guys this map real quick. He carries all of the red, and then you have McClellan representing the Democratic side in blue. Now, one point I want to make about political parties, and I've talked about this before, is we have Republican and Democrat, and I know those are the names of the political parties that we have nowadays. Those parties back then aren't the same as the parties nowadays. So when we say Republican, Lincoln was a Republican. He wasn't a Republican in the sense of Republicans nowadays. The parties really didn't line up, from back then to nowadays. There's going to be significant changes that occur. So ultimately what's going to happen is Sherman's march to the sea through Atlanta and then eventually out into the coast at Appomattox. Grant defeats Lee, and that's going to end the Civil War. So on April 9th, 1865, Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, and they end the fighting of the Civil War. This painting of the two sides signing the treaty, well, not the treaty, but signing the surrender. Another one, everybody standing around shaking hands. So ultimately, from 1863 to 1865, this last segment of the war, the South just severely lacks resources. And not only that, but as you're not winning a ton, as things are starting to fall apart, unity is going to start to wane. The North is able to bring that part of the country together, a unified effort, and ends up being very successful in this war. Now, the celebration and the victory is very short lived because 5 days after the truce is signed, Lincoln is shot. Uh, he's out at a play in Ford's Theater. John Wilkes Booth breaks into where he is sitting with his wife, sneaks up behind him, shoots him, and Lincoln, very soon afterward, is pronounced dead. So this war, certainly at the cost of many lives, but especially Abraham Lincoln's life. We talked about this transition that happened from a war to bring the Union back together to now it's a war about ending slavery. And certainly a lot of people are wanting to defend slavery as an important part of their life. So I'm going to end this here. In terms of the Civil War, obviously we have a little bit left to talk about the effects and kind of the results, and certainly we'll get into that a little bit more in the next section on Reconstruction.